Today we're talking about adverbs, which is a concept from stage 23. First, we're going to quickly talk about what adverbs are. Adverbs describe verbs. Essentially, they're describing how or when the action is done. Is the action done quickly or slowly, etc.? Typically, but not always, adverbs end in ly in English. Adverbs come to us from adjectives. The two forms are very closely related. So there are some adverbs in Latin that end with an E with a macron, and those are adverbs that are created from first and second declension adjectives. So assiduous becomes assidue, constantly instead of constant. Pulchre, beautifully. Clare, clearly. Other adverbs in Latin have a ter or an iter at the end. These are also formed from adjectives as well. Mostly they're formed from third declension adjectives. So acreter, bitterly. Celeriter, quickly. Libenter, freely. And you'll see that these adverb forms, whether they end in ter or whether they end in e, those represent the positive degree. So we spoke about adjectives as having 3 degrees of comparison. Adverbs have the same structure. If you need to review that, please feel free to watch my adjective video. So these are the positive degree forms of the adverb. Typically, it'll end in either a long E, that macron will be mandatory, or you might have an ITER. Some Latin adverbs are irregular, though. They don't end in an E. They don't end in an ITER, but they're still adverbs because they still tell you how a verb was done or when a verb was done. Some examples for you. Statim, which means immediately. Subito, which means suddenly. Saipe, that means often. Denique, which means finally. And aliquando, which means sometimes. All of these are still adverbs because they talk about when a verb is happening, but they don't have that stereotypical E or iter ending. The comparative degree, things get much more normal. There is one comparative form because adverbs are describing verbs. They don't have to have a wide variety of endings because they don't describe things that have a wide variety of genders or cases. In English, we're going to consider the comparative degree of an adverb as more blankly or rather blankly. So, in order to form or recognize the comparative degree adverb, you're looking for the stem of the adverb with an ius ending. Lentius means more slowly. Fortius means rather bravely. Calarius, rather quickly. And tardius, more slowly. Those definitions are relatively interchangeable, right? You could say that someone fought more bravely than he did. But you could also say, boy, Modestus fought rather bravely. Some forms, mostly just based on their definition, cannot be made comparative. So the adverb today, it's an adverb because it can tell you when a verb is happening. I did my homework today. When did you do it? I did it today. But you can't compare today. You can't say that something is more today than something else. However, some of them can be compared, like often, for example. If they can be compared in English, then you can compare them in Latin by just doing the exact same format and featuring an ius ending. The superlative degree functions much the same way that the superlative degree adjective functions. In other words, it's most or very, and then whatever the adverb was to begin with. Some examples for you: lentissime, most slowly. Very briefly, fortissime. Saepissime, most often. In the same way as your adjectives, the more letters you have, or the most letters in an adverb form, means it's the superlative degree. If you have the most letters, then you have most blankly. There are a couple of special forms in the same way that there are some special forms of adjective comparison. So if that original positive degree adjective ended in an er, then the superlative adverb is erime. So pulcherime, miserime, etc. And then finally, there are some irregular forms of adverbs that you really need to make sure that you just memorize. Unfortunately, they don't really look that alike. They don't follow the same rules as your other comparative and superlative adverbs. They do have a couple of the same features, like melius is an IUS ending, so that's comparative, and that kind of rings that bell. But plus, plus doesn't really give you anything because it doesn't have that IUS that you're used to. Thankfully, although the superlative degree forms, although they look different, and although they're not they don't have like the most amount of letters that we talked about earlier, they do still end with an e with the macron, which has always been indicative of the fact that it's an adverb. So just keep those in mind. Make sure you write them down in your notebook. Make sure you